I like to get all the clapping ahead out of the way at first so that I don't feel any pressure. So we all can hear me. I'm going to start running this. I have some help because, of course, I didn't heed the warning, don't have too many videos and all that stuff. I thought I'm going all in. And you're coming with me, so let's see. Now, I like to have something going on in the background when I talk about myself because I didn't want my big head just hanging on the screen. And this is something that we all can speak to. And I like to introduce myself as Bonny McClain, and I am biased. I'd like to say that to remind everybody that we're all biased. The data can be as raw as you can imagine it. It's all biased. We're human, biased. The artificial intelligence, all of that is biased. But I think our advantage is that we bring other resources to the conversation. We can talk about the water systems in the areas we're looking at. We can look at the forest. We can look at the wildlife. We can drill down into cities and oceans and how we build and how we use industry to our advantage and our disadvantage. We can see what we're doing to the earth that leaves a scar, things that maybe we can intervene later and try to go back. But we have the advantage of maybe having a passion, but also having some scientific evidence to put forward to hopefully help the world in a different sort of a way. And that's kind of what I bring to you with this kind of cinematic start to what I want to spend maybe 30, 40 minutes kind of talking, with you. I talk really fast, so we might be done. We might be done sooner. But, what I like about this is when you tell a story, it's not just about the numbers. You're bringing context to the stage. And you have a distinct advantage to do that. And as a recovering medical writer, there's not really a narrative voice in a gallbladder, but there is a narrative voice when we bring data to the conversation. And so what I'm going to talk to you, this isn't like a single train of thought. And if you know me, I'm not really capable of single trains of thought. But, I kind of travel the world talking about individual stories with sort of different topics around, social anthropology, culture, climate. And so what I did is I kind of created some little vignettes that I kind of wanted to bring those things on board for you so you can experience them. And then, I'll share the link with you. And if you want to drill down into any of the topics, I did build in some hyperlinks that will lead to more information. So don't feel like you're being shortchanged if we just zoom over something. There's a deeper exploration. And I like to think about expanding our humanity with data stories, because it's the stories that matter. The stories are what, if you want to be a leader in any industry or a leader in your job, wherever you are, on the earth, you lead by kind of influencing change, getting that emotion going in somebody that's going to influence how they're going to move forward. And I think we're uniquely able to do that with geospatial. Now, this is someone that, this is a TED Talk. The link is in the thing. If you ask for the slides, I'll send them to you. Now, this was a new piece of information. Stephen DeBerry did this really powerful TED Talk where he posed this question, because a lot of the work I do is looking at vulnerable cities and what makes them vulnerable and what makes other cities just work fine. So we go in and we look at different metrics, and what we don't measure, we can't change. We all probably are familiar with that saying. And he made this observation. He's like, have you ever noticed that the east side of places are usually where we put, where the division is, where we have, disparity by design. Somehow this is how it happens. And I was thinking to myself, I'm thinking, well, the urban centers I was familiar with, I was like, well, yeah, but nature isn't, racist, and nature isn't making these decisions. This is just how the world works. And if you think about looking at the North Pole and the globe going counterclockwise, think about where the wind goes. And so if there's any pollution or anything in the environment or any toxins, you could kind of see. And he's not just theorizing this with like, well, this makes sense. Look at the wind. I'm going to show you. He's got some math behind it, which if you're like me, that makes it all truth. But in America, we see this in a lot of our cities, many of our cities. If anyone here is from the States, which I'm sure you are, I just haven't met you. But we can think of Detroit, we can think of Chicago, we can think of all of our cities and think most of them, not all, and I'll feature one that doesn't follow that, but it kind of makes sense. And then there's some that we see all around the world. Like if you look at East London, the east side of Paris, Jerusalem, Vancouver, you can see some of those patterns. And so in 2016, I think, there was this story of the East Side Story. And they went in and they put math behind it. And they did a statistical analysis because they really could pick up smokestacks using, satellite data. And so they did all these mathematical figures here. And the paper to this is also available. But the dominant logic that industrial area was to put here, we're going to put the railroad here, the highways are going to go here, these buildings are going to go here. So, the dominant logic of the industrial area was it was in line with exactly what we're talking about here, persistent neighborhood sorting. And this is back in the 1800s where this original study was done. And if you look here, the way they measured it, they have all the math is here and it all checks out. But they're also look at A and look at B. So you look at where the intensity of the pollution is, and they created gradients and they had grids and they measured everything. They used Gaussian kernels, but they could show you the share of low-skilled workers where they lived in relation to the pollution. So, sometimes in the US and, other places, there's disparity by design, there's otherism, there's things like that. And we're going to explore some good news about some changes that are being made to ameliorate some of these. But, before we do that, I wanted to show you, the fossil fuel pollution. So what you're looking at here is the Americas. And what you see at the top, that's the carbon. That's the fossil fuel. The green is the good guys. And the red is kind of like any type of fire or burning or anything like that. But the good news is, look at the green. The green kind of flashing on is a sink for all of the carbon. And I wanted to show Asia and Australia as well because, it's just really interesting to watch, the whirling of the wind and how the earth, how we can actually heal ourselves. Like there's all possibility. It's not all going to be this chemical storm of, fossil fuel, but I really like showing how the land and the ocean act as a sink. And this is the last one, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And you'll have the links, so you'll be able to look and observe different places. But, I didn't mention, this was modeled by NASA. So NASA modeled these based on the pollution and the carbon data that they have. And this just follows suit, right? You expected to see something like this. No, but have you all seen or heard of the body works, these plasticine cadavers that are posed? And I like to use this when I'm talking about kind of perception and what we see when we look at things. And this is kind of a representation of my husband and I. No, this is me and my husband playing cards. No, we were at one of these museums, and a man and his little tiny son, they come up to a seat. I think they were playing chess. The figures that we were looking at were playing chess. And of course, they were all fully, dissected, and the plasticine is what makes them not rot. And the little boy looks at the figures and he says, Daddy, that man ain't got no. Now, what would you think? Can anyone think of what would you think a little boy would say when he sees this? Like you could think, skin, he doesn't have a face. The little boy says, he ain't got no shoes. And I was trying to think to myself, well, that's the least of his worries. But it just reminds you, what is in your brain and what's triggering for you is very unique and individual to you. And, I stumbled upon an exhibit that Mimi did in DC. And the relevance here is she's a very talented artist. And this is just one thing that she has. She talks about the library of missing data sets. And she talks about the word missing as being normative. Because if something is missing, then we expect it to be there, but it's not. And so that's problematic. And so maybe we've left some of these spaces blank because we have hidden social biases and we have some indifferences. Or sometimes we just don't think about creating a data question that's very well formulated, that can bring more data into the conversation, that can kind of balance out some of those biases that we're all built with. And the solution to that, we can't do anything about it. We can just be transparent, and we can be as effortful as we can in making sure we're bringing a lot of data to our questions. And I transitioned from working in healthcare analytics and working in medicine, because I realized they don't really abide by first principles. We're not trying to get down to the root of why is everybody so sick? We just kind of work in our own little bubble. And I was talking with, maybe it was Vicki, but we were talking about how, if the GDP of your country is 18% from healthcare, you're not really motivated to make everybody shiny and bright and healthy in the morning, because you just collapsed your economy. And the work that I was asked to do was always to pivot information by race. So I was, as an analyst, whatever data we were getting from clinical trials, clinical research, we created these buckets. And I realized through my own analysis and my background in genetics that there's more intra-race variability than there is inter-race. So, I'm biracial. And when I got this, I thought this was hysterical because, in my whole life, my race was binary. When I was growing up, are you black or white? Are you black or white? And then, we kind of evolved a little, and we're like, look at her, she's multiracial, But there still was no descriptor. And then when I ran the 23andMe, and I found out that, my gosh, I'm 42% Northwestern European, and then, West African. This kind of shows you how just looking at race doesn't tell you anything about anyone. It's a very poor biologic proxy for anything in medicine. And it's also just a social construct that we can't really move forward with. And so we need other things to be part of the conversation. And that's where I came across looking at the built infrastructure. So my focus has been on cities, on what makes them vulnerable. And these are things that so I'm going to show you a couple tools that are built in here that we can look at that can give you some information that can talk about the DNA or the makeup of a city. I like to call it a metabolism of a city because it is all energy. And so what I do when I create presentations or stories is, the news. I just look at the newspaper, what's coming up in the news. And this was kind of an interesting story to follow because there was a viaduct built in Syracuse along the 81. And when it was built, it literally divided a community. It took the 15th ward and made it the poorest area in Syracuse just by fact of where the division occurred. And so now they've come together and it's taken a while, but there is motivation and intention to just tear it down. And this is just a little bit of, so I wanted to just kind of first, is everyone familiar sort of with redlining? I'll take a second just to explain, but what happened in the 1930s, there was this housing shortage. So we didn't have enough housing, and we wanted more housing. So we thought, what we're going to do? We're going to build these housing neighborhoods, and we're going to fill them up with people, and won't life be great and grand? And so what they did at that point is that's where mortgages started being prevalent. Before that, you could put like $5,000. This is in the US. You could put down $5,000 on a house, and you had about, maybe 10 years or so to pay it off, and you were good. But then when they started building this huge, amount of homes, the banks got involved, and the Federal Housing Authority in the US was like, well, if we're going to fund these loans, we got to kind of come out and see what our investment looks like, and we're going to decide the risk probability of lending certain groups of people money. So what they did is they went and and I'll show you some of the terms they use, but they went to the Syracuse and they would, look. And if they saw a lot of migrants, if they saw immigrants, did I do that? Oh, you did that. Oh, we're ready. So what they did is they gave it a score. So green's great. Green, you get all the money you want. Here's more money that you didn't even ask for. And then are you doing that? Oh, just wait a second. Sorry. So the yellow neighborhoods were kind of like, cautious, red, blue. You can't see, let me see if I can get this. I might be able to hit this. Let me see. So yeah, if I go over here and I pick, so if you pick an area, I don't know if I'm doing it or you doing it, but we'll just take it from here. So what this is here, so this is the redlining from the 1930s. So I don't expect you to be familiar with Syracuse, but what you can kind of tell is that, the communities that were redlined were the ones that didn't get the money. And if you were probably in a yellow area, you probably didn't get any money either. And if you're blue, you got a little bit of money. But people say, well, Bonnie, that was like 100 years ago. So what difference does that make? Well, what you can do is you can look today and map the same communities. And some of the yellow communities go red, and also some of the red communities go green. That's how you measure change. But what's interesting here in the middle, what we look at is the social vulnerability index. So these populations from before, how have they persisted and how have they evolved over all this time? And you can see the social vulnerability index in this community that you see on the far right is, it's pretty high, right? And then you could look at the percent minority, you could look at life expectancy. All of these measures are off. They haven't caught up to their counterparts on the left that, got home loans or got homes. And if you think about it, that's how, at least in the US, that's how we exchange, we leave wealth for the next generation. It's in our homes. So if you have generation after generation that hasn't had transfer of wealth, you can kind of imagine what the future looks like. Oh, you need to do, yeah, if you don't mind. Oh no, you're taking us on a tour. There we go. I can click through this now. So this is really interesting to look at because you can look at different communities. And then I wanted to make sure we were all up to speed on our geospatial knowledge. So this is my Geospatial 101 class for y'all, raster vector. I just think this thing's funny, so I always stick it in there. Because now we're going to start looking, and these are just really quick maps that I did. Like whenever I want to look at an area really fast, I usually just hop into QGIS and I like pull in OpenStreetMap stuff and I look around and I just want to see what's going on depending on my question. What I was trying to look at here, so financial decisions become self-fulfilling. Because if you have property taxes that are assessed on homeowners and you don't have a lot of homeowners in your area, in your census tract, in your wherever, then you don't have the investment into your school systems, you don't have the investment into your, a lot of investment doesn't happen. So you're creating these communities almost intentionally. And what you see over here, well, there's a better slide to show it, but so you can see the red, this is the rendering of the redlining. And what you see here is the viaduct over, and where that's impacting these communities, and there's actually a better way to see it on the next slide. Because you're looking at land use here, and you're also looking at the, like to the left and to the right of the line that drops down the middle, that's the 81 highway. And this is how it showed up historically. You can see the viaduct splitting the city. And you also see on the near part of the city, you can see where there's businesses, there's buildings, there's all kinds of opportunity, and things are pretty level and flat on the far side. And there's also, I think I can point to it without messing everything up, there's like wastewater treatment plants. The buildings that were put on the side of the 15th Ward, where the poverty and the increased asthma and all these other measures that we're looking at to look at vital communities, has persisted. But what's really interesting is people finally have stepped up and they've had enough. And they're saying, we're going to pull that thing down and we're going to make living more equitable. And another story that was sent to me was about Charlotte. What's really interesting about this is this community was called Biddlesville. And by some irony, my dad was from Biddlesville, North Carolina. And I went there when he had Alzheimer's to make him a picture book of the community. And it was just plight. It didn't fare well. But now the community has come together and have said, we want our community back. So what they've done here is, there's the green is this area called Dilworth Myers Park. Everything's great there. And you see, this doesn't follow that east thing, because if you look at the density of the roads, so where all those highways and railroads come together, that's where the disparate communities, the marginalized communities live. And also in Charlotte, you can look at the flight path of a major airport, and it goes over where the orange is, and where the utility lines are, and they've had enough. They're now aware of this, and they're starting to make these changes that I'm showing you. So that's what it looks like now, and that's what their plan is. They've started an urban plan to make the city more livable and equitable. And this has been a project that I've been working on. I don't know, has anyone heard of Healthy and Sustainable Cities? It's this great, wait till you see this thing. It's Pythonic. It's built on like a Python platform, but there's a lot of ways to get to it. And what they've done is they've picked cities to kind of introduce you to how to use the tool. You can use it, I'm gonna show it to you, but it's very interesting to look at. And what I did is I did some screenshots to show you what the output and what the data looks like. So what they've done, this is the article, the Lancet Global Health. I think I hyperlinked this, but the link is there. So what they decided to do is, well, what should we measure? Where should we start? And so the Lancet Global Health went in and looked at things like transportation and walkability of cities, and how much green space is available. And they created these 11 Ds that you might not be able to see from there, but they're like destination accessibility. How easy is it for you to get from point A to point B? What does the employment look like? I was surprised that in Detroit, that we all think of as being solely the auto industry, if you go and measure their distribution of employment now, it's quite diverse. And it just reads down there like diversity, desirability, density, all those local urban things that those of you who work in urban planning are familiar with. So this is a software package that you basically download, and you can use it. I use it in Docker just because I use it in a training and a teaching environment. So I want it to be sort of like self-contained, and people not like, well, I use this, and I use Linux, and I use Windows. And I use it in a Docker environment. But it is amazing. And this is an output. This is generated by the code that you run. I think I did a little code sample, because how it works, and I don't want to spend too much time, but right now it's programmed with like population density that you pick. So you find your boundary file, you find your population density. We have links to transportation metrics. So if you want to see how easy it is to get across your city, you have access to that. So green spaces. So all these measures, and you can customize them based on your personal project. But this is what your data outputs, this beautiful graphic. This way you can look at it and say, hey, look, we're doing okay with public transport, but you know what? We need to get more green space. Or you get a reading of where each community is, and the sweet spot too is that you can compare it to other communities. So this is just a Docker environment. I don't think I need to show that to anyone here, but you just run it. You can run it in terminal, you can run it inside Docker, inside their terminal. I've done it in Jupyter Hub. And they also have like a GUI, you don't really have to do anything, but what I like about that, having the GUI, is that it takes a minute to get your data set up in the way that the program can read it. But it's just YAML files, and they give you one that works, and then you just have to, say prayers and vespers over the one that you tried to make and hope it'll work too. But so this is just how it runs. I mean, I just ran this in a terminal, and it just builds out the region, the indicators, and all of this stuff. And you can go in and customize it a little bit with Python as well. And Now, this is not anything to do with that, but this is how I used to have to do it before. And I threw everything at this thing so I didn't have to make 5 million slides. I wouldn't normally have this all on the same slide, but if I want to look at Sao Paulo, which is what I was looking at, I need to kind of look at a lot of things. I need to create like a buffer with a centroid. I need to like layer it, put a grid. I need to figure all of that out so I can do comparables. So, this is just kind of what it might look like in QGIS, with measuring like, hospitals. I was looking at distance to hospitals and how it varied based on population density and how it varied based on income. And we have some indigenous populations in Brazil, so I was interested to see what their access looked like. And, this goes from bad to worse, right? But the information here, the yellow that you see is mining communities. So I also wanted to see how close is the mining to different populations. Are any of these hallowed lands from the indigenous populations being taken over for mining? The red dots are just like clinics that I identified based on like hospital bed or how many patients they can see. So, you know how to pick the measures that you have. And then on the far right is just the global health, the population surges that we expect to see over the next 10 years and what that's going to make a city like Sao Paulo look like. But now if you run the code and you have your files set up, according to the YAML file, you can look and compare cities across the world. They give you 25 cities initially that are kind of mapped out sort of to help you get started. You still have to find the data and set it up, but they really are pulling you through it. So you can look right now and see what areas in Sao Paulo, have the highest walkability. And your data generates this. So these figures show up in the files that are configured. There's a file that's called figures, and when you run the code successfully, it's filled with these figures that were generated based, and you can modify them depending on how much Python or how dirty you want to get your hands. But if you're just looking for a comparative estimate, you can see open spaces, you can see public transport. So all of these measures are here, and then you can look at other cities and compare them. So I just thought this was really a neat, so basically all you're providing is the boundary. So you can do it by like districts, maybe you have 76 districts, different areas of Brazil, different areas of any country basically. And it also generates a report. Of course it does. So this contains all those figures and a little bit of the narrative information that you provide. And then you have something that can be, a policy map for you if you work, in a county or a community level and you want to bring this sort of information to the attention of people that can, influence change. Because as we know, data is mostly socially constructed. So it really serves us well to have some data behind it and some data visualization. And there's also, I don't know, how many of you are familiar with this journal? Any of you urban guys out here? This is like a rabbit hole in my office. And I pull things out when I'm going to be speaking, and usually it would be a whole workshop. But they do this mixed use indicator to measure life quality. And I like to see what different people are measuring. And I thought this was great. This lends itself really well to something like QGIS because, you can decide what it is you want to look at. This is dependent on your data question. Maybe you want to know residential. Maybe you want to know, how many places of interest are within. I did this for a presentation I gave in Detroit where we were looking at US Census tracts, and we were trying to see where access to certain things were. And once we had all the code written and we knew what we were exploring, we just kind of swapped out different measures and different indicators. And this is what we would be able to see just by creating, a buffer like a 400 meter, like a 15-minute walk buffer around the center of a census tract. And, this is kind of something I was looking at because they have a forward program, and there were two problems here. The zoning is kind of the modern era of doing some redlining, because I could go into a community and I can say, well, the minimum size house you can build in this residential community is, 5,000, square feet. Well, that's going to make people that aren't looking for 5,000 square feet, they're not going to be able to live or build in those communities. So that's why you see some of those the buffers there. And what we were looking at, this is their forward thinking, where they're creating a lot of mixed use. Because as we've seen in the data, mixed use brings crime down. Because, I used to live in San Francisco and in the financial district. And on the weekend, nothing. There was nothing there. And that's where crime kind of bubbled up, because there weren't people walking the streets. Nothing was going to be back on and open till Monday. And now we're starting to see there's changes to be made with spatial and putting more multi-use things, in certain areas. But, this is a really easy way. You can do calculations and find out what's in these regions and where are you developing and what difference is it making. And this is just kind of from above, looking at those same areas. And this final, this tool is a plugin in QGIS. Anyone ever use this one? It's a plugin, and it's so easy to use. And it's looking at a different way to measure walkable access, because it's not just about linearity. If you have to walk around a parking lot, if you have to walk around a larger building, if there's lots of buildings, public and private, and you can't walk a certain way, these are some tools that help. Instead of looking at, permeability, they're looking at the perimeters as well. And then they're looking at catchment. And this just kind of describes how they are looking at the permeability measures and how, where it works really, really well, because there's different ways of looking at it. And the heterogeneous mix of blocks is usually the best in a community. And, you can dive deeper into this if you want to have the link. And it really looks like this. Now, what you can see, if you see the little star over there, that's the center area. And then you'll see there's a purple. Those are tracking, so they'll take a dot, and then they'll show you all the different ways you can walk around this census tract or wherever you put your barrier. And you're able to determine, here it's 15,544 meters. You're able to walk within this community, around these blocks and these buildings. And these measures can be compared to each other. So we do the 400, because that's the 15-minute walk. And then, this eye-catching thing, this is the same sort of thing. Anything that's green, has a smaller perimeter, and it ends up being more walkable. And you have to kind of do both together, because there's some things that can distort this. But it's a very simple plugin that you can just load right into QGIS. Now, I showed you a lot of different ways to look at a community, to think about a community. And what I like to do at the end is share this. If you see it, raise your hand. Does anybody see what this is? I'll give you a hint in a minute, but it's usually somebody sees it. If I tell you what it is, tell me if you see it. It's a cow. It's actually called the Dellenbach Cow. And I'm going to show you let me tell you what's important about it, and then I'll show you how to see it. Once you see this, you never forget it. And I like to think about that like geospatial. When someone shows me something geospatially, or they bring something into my community, or they make me aware of something, it stays with me forever. You will never see this image again and not know instantly what it is. It's just something they use in psychiatry. And you're all kind of failing right now. I'm joking. So, this. Snout. This is an eye, that's an eye. The cow is looking at you. Does anyone see that now? So, but now it's obviously a cow, now that you can see it. But this is an ear. Over there, it's an ear. And it's kind of a funny story, because I use a lot of artwork when I'm working with physician audiences, because physician audiences don't want to know that they don't know something. So I used to put a clinical paper up there, and I'd show them one of the graphs in the paper, and I'd say, I would hide the title, tell me what's going on here. And everybody would clam up because of that like awareness that, well, if I don't know, if I'm wrong. So I started putting pieces of art there because everyone's like, well, I don't get it either. And they would be very brave about what they saw and what they didn't see. So we started using this cow, and he ended up being on the Today Show with my friend who wrote the book, Amy Herman, about perception. And now I feel like, since Gail King, talked about it, more and more people have seen it before. And I always like to end on a positive note too, because this is how a city can be transformed. This is always a fan favorite because it's really funny. It's just showing you the city and like how you can clean it up, how you can make it more livable, how you can kind of offset some of the carbon, how you can, we all know what urban heat islands are, places with asphalt and dark surfaces, they become hotter. And so, now we can introduce, some modes of transportation that aren't going to generate pollution. We can put crosswalks that people can see, and we can protect. Sometimes we just throw up a crosswalk, but if someone's not protected, that's not doing its job. There's more to come. This is just it has like a little sound that's very cute. So if you get the link, it's very dramatic with the sounds. We don't have that on, but it's just showing you these simple little things that you almost think they're there until you notice that they're not. And what I always tell people with geospatial is it's not always just about what's there, it's also about what's not there. And it's sort of like that cow. You have to get used to seeing what's not there, what's there, and being aware of it. Any minute now we're gonna have some cafe revelers, there we are. And I just think it's a cute way, because when you talk about people's cities, they feel a certain way. And so if you end on something positive, occasionally, people take some of this stuff away. I mean, trees are the easiest thing. And, I'll end here and we'll start with questions in just a minute, just so to know who I am. This is where you can find me if you want to have more conversations, if you want to continue a conversation, or if you'd like to get a copy of this is a Prezi presentation, so it's actually a link. But the link can be shared, and I don't care about any of that. Like if you use it, I am a principal consultant at Global Impact Assessment. I work with companies that are building and developing. This isn't a plug. I mean, I don't do anything. They get work and they say, "Can you help us?" And I show up. I don't. But it's interesting that more and more companies are realizing that sustainability is important. They want people to look at the work they're doing and help guide their clients into making some of these better choices. The book in the middle, I got elected to kind of give the talk about Locate Press because I'm the bad child in the group, probably. I'm probably the farthest behind on their book. But I got 4 chapters done, guys. I'm working on it. So Locate Press has a booth in the main room, and we're going to be what's the word I'm looking for? Sweepstakes. Raffling, sweepstakes. Books will be yours if you win. How about we just go there? But what you have to do is you have to fill out a piece of paper, and you have to do it sometime in the next 24 hours, because then on Friday? Oh, okay. Well, you better get on it. Keynotes tomorrow, the books will be given away. And it's kind of like, I think we're going to do like first come, first serve. You get to pick the book you want, sort of a thing. And so the book that I'm working on with them is Geospatial Data, Science and the Art of Storytelling, how we can take the data that we use and the information that we're generating and tell compelling stories about it to motivate change. A lot of you have grabbed the Python book, that's gone. The Geospatial sequel, I'll have a couple copies tomorrow that I'll just have on hand. And if you have any questions, we have a few minutes because we had run, we started a little late. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Oh, yeah.
Okay. Should I go? Oh, wait a moment. It works.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting talk. How do you see the tension between, some of these efforts to make communities and cities more livable and sustainable, and some of the criticism of these data-based kind of technocratic approaches as being kind of not necessarily reflective of the community needs or perhaps promoting gentrification in communities? And how do you kind of square those two perspectives?
Well, it's definitely not about gentrification. That's not the message, but you're right. That seems to be what happens. We want to move people out and move things in, and that's got to be built into these communities that have stepped up, that are wanting to reclaim these communities. They're not doing it to put in but that's all zoning. They're not doing it to put in expensive townhomes or things like that. Usually when you have people working towards these sorts of goals, they have these really strong, well-articulated objectives, right up front. But you know what you're seeing out there, and it can be problematic. But we always include people from the community in the conversations, absolutely. Because there was a time when people look at the model in New York and they're like, well, I'm going to close down some roads and I'm going to put in we're going to do outdoor dining and we're going to do this. And then people, we're like, well, we're going to lose 180 parking spaces if you do that. These parking spaces are free. Now you want to build a parking deck where I have to pay $1.50 an hour, so this is where you get the community to weigh, and then people have to take a step back. Because if you don't live in the community that you're trying to, evolve, then you may not want to be the loudest voice in the room, kind of a thing. So that's a very great question, because that is a lot of the backlash, that people will not allow the people to communicate, and they won't put it on the referendum because they don't want the pushback, because they have their own agenda. But a lot of these communities are in crisis, they really need something yesterday. And so they don't have adequate housing. Their places are condemned in some of these areas. But just this awareness that they didn't get there because they didn't pull themselves up from the bootstraps and they just work harder. Sometimes the structure and the choices that we make with policy and where we make decisions of where we let people live, a lot of that can be very directing in where they end up. Because everybody numb, it's just cold. Everybody's
Any other question?
Oh, we got, uh-oh.
No. Where is it? It's me. Yeah. So when now we see with those issues with how the planning has been done, are there new laws to avoid that kind of issues, at least in the US?
Well, the U.S. is a tough nut to crack. Because, if you have 10 different cities, you have 10 different plans, 10 different, people that can make these decisions. I think now it's becoming a little more necessary, because the change in climate and the lack of sustainability in some of these communities, they're just flooding out. There was that big rebuilding initiative that the current administration put out. And when I went and read the details in some of the communities I was exploring, like Detroit, there's a lot of money earmarked to find out why the neighborhoods that are flooding are all where the marginalized people live, and why hasn't anything been done by now. And then you go to these meetings and you get the funding allocation, and well, we didn't get all the money we needed. Sorry, So we try and we educate and we have people. Once you stop looking at other people and you start looking at communities and you look at the built infrastructure and persistent barriers and how much impervious soil and surfaces there are, and the pavement, and this is not a walkable census tract because it's all concrete. And then they start rolling in plants. It is really all the boots on the ground. It's people like us. It's people like the people that do the work at OpenStreetMap. I just spoke at State of the Map, the US version, and everything that they're measuring is just tremendous and admirable. Like, I wouldn't think the way they're, because there's no addresses in the Indian slums for the most part. They're trying to just get addresses in places, and they're going door to door to door, you know, and there's a lot of rural places in the South that there aren't any addresses. It's like, well, you know, make a left at the old basket where we used to keep apples, and then make a right at, you know, the cow that's always wandering in the street, and you'll see, you'll find them, you know. And so there's certain initiatives that we see coming to light more where people like you know, and us are leading the charge and making people aware of what's going on in the community and how this is all accessible for the most part. Accessible meaning it's there. Now, we need to improve that with STEM and people that can code and people that can run the software and people that are aware of the software. And that's kind of where I'm noticing a little bit of an uptick. I just judged a big, this blew me away. We were at North Carolina. It's a high school of math and like engineering. And like these kids come out and they are pitching us this research that they're doing. And me and the guy sitting next to me were like, this is better than my thesis. You know, like, they're being trained up to think critically and create an experiment, test the experiment. And in fact, the winning presentation was a group of kids that were looking at a planned city that we have in North Carolina and evaluating, and I thought it was going to be like horrible because they were talking about safety and police, and I thought, oh no, they're going to be saying send more police in. Da, da, da. They weren't doing that at all. They were saying like these certain metrics in a community decrease crime in that community. And I thought that was, and these are like, you know, we're like, oh, where are you going to college? He goes, oh, that's a year away. I'm like, oh boy. I mean, the kids coming up and really focused on this. And that's why, you know, I think there's such a reach from FOSS, you know, 4G to get younger people involved because they're very, very motivated. Justly so, in my opinion. And if anyone's working on anything in their community that they want to share too, that's always interesting because, you know, it's different wherever you are, absolutely.
We have another question here.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you for this great talk. A lot of what you talked about made me think of The Color of Law. Have you read that book? Yeah. Yeah. Amazing book. And
I didn't think this crowd I mean, it really is. It's an American thing, you know, unfortunately. And I do a lot of that sort of thing in some of the talks I do that are closer to home. But go ahead.
So it's this great book that kind of lays out the history of segregation in the U.S. But even with evidence as he lays it out, a lot of people still aren't convinced of the connection between these various policies and the situation we have today in racial disparities. I'm curious, you know, that's a very narrative approach. You do a lot of data storytelling. I would love to hear, because kind of is the best of all the worlds. So adding in narratives, historical evidence, anecdotes, and data and visualizations. Have you had any anecdotes where you've actually been able to kind of bring people to the other side and really actually finally convince them of the intersection of all of these factors to create today's reality?
Well, see, we have this false truth in the U.S. right now that we're wrestling with, you know, about like I said it, it's true. And I was talking to someone and I call it the Starbuckization of fact, because, you know, we live in the U.S. where when I go to Starbucks, when I was young, you had decaf and you had regular coffee and you went on about your life. Now I can have a butterscotch malted hummingbird milk, you know, say foam next to the cup. I mean, we have this expectation that our reality, our facts, and our truth can be customized based on what we believe. And that's very problematic, and people need to step forward and push back against it. I was at a group where I actually told them the origin of the police department being to return escaped slaves back to the plantation owners. That's where the police department came from. And so if you could be very polarizing around things like Black Lives Matter, but you have to understand if this is an organization that has those roots and no one talks about it, I'm not saying that, to change anything, but don't deny that that was part of it, because then you look like you're obfuscating something and people don't trust you. If you said, yes, that's what we did then, but here's what we're about now, or just don't hide it under the rug. And you may have heard of critical race theory being banned by politicians. And, depending on even what side of the aisle you're on, you can be a social, liberal, Democrat. And why are you not saying that, wait a minute, this isn't a theory, people. They were slave ships that came here and, it happened. Like, how do we leave, England and within how many years we're the next superpower? It's because we had free labor, people. We didn't have to pay anybody. So you just start telling the stories, not in a confrontational way. Like when I tell a story, I'm usually like, well, isn't this interesting? But I don't say you should be ashamed of yourselves. You know what I mean? I feel like this is information that we just don't know. And I think it's a beautiful history to bring the truth and to speak the truth about a lot of these things and to understand from both sides. And I think that that's a beautiful book that kind of can illuminate. And, the number one reason should be, why should I be today years old and finding about this in some book? When I was in school, nobody talked about any of this. It was the 1619 Project, where I learned that mortgages is a term from slavery. They took mortgages on the actual slaves so they could buy more slaves. So there's a lot of, our lexicon is rife for it and for the opportunity to talk. And take Germany as an example. I mean, we have an entire country that does it right. We don't have to invent anything. We can just have the same reverence for this happened and here we are today. And the same thing with places like Vienna. No one's sweeping it under the rug and saying, nope, that didn't happen. So, the more of us that talk about it and are accepting about it and can listen to different truths, the better we're going to be. So thank you for that question.
Any other quick question? Because we are slightly over time. Yes.
But also, you can reach out, and if you find me, I don't know, I hang out on some of the social spaces, and I write about a lot of the stuff in a more narrative voice, and I bring in data sets that people can access and download, and sometimes I upload videos of how to look at this type of data and how to look at that type of data. So if you're interested in this sort of a thing, or climate or sustainability, we can continue the dialogue. Yes?
Just last one question. Did you try your algorithm, workability algorithm on Prizren before coming in?
Wait, you said something about an algorithm?
The workability of Prizren, did you try to assess it before coming in?
I can't.
Workability.
Yeah, if you try the workability index in this city just before coming here.
No. Because I respect the fact that I got to tell you, I am just blown away by Kosovo. And I'm going to tell you a funny little story. I was asked to speak at FOSS 4G, and I thought they meant Baltimore. So I was like, I sent my stuff in. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'd love to have you be a keynote. And I'm like, Prizren? Where's... So, I mean, it was such a lesson for me that I wanted to be respectful of the complexity of a place that has this robust and sometimes contentious history. I rarely talk about places that I'm standing in, unless it's Washington, D.C., because I'm just like ready to go.
Thanks a lot again. Also for reminding us how open source can be used. I think this morning we saw more about the commercial application, and now you reminded us that Also, open source is the foundation of science, of research, and also of policy and decision making. I think this is very important, and it's really thanks to this beautiful software that this community is offering us.
And there's one more thing too, like if you are in your organization or in a passion of yours, if you're called upon to speak on these sorts of topics, I have never been told what data set to bring with me when I go and I speak. So I make sure, like all the books have this sort of stuff that is part of my ethos and what I believe to spread the word. So you can pack anything you do and you write. You can talk about communities. You can talk about climate if that's your jam. You don't have to sit there and look at a superstore worth of data. You can be innovative and use different data sources. My area of expertise is in the U.S. Census. So there's a lot of different stories that I tell there, and that's a data set that I travel with a lot. So just remember, when you are privileged enough to be able to lead a conversation, be part of a conversation, think about the data questions that you want to formulate and bring. And if they're making a difference, or they're just saying you sold more pencils last quarter than the quarter before, that's not really moving the needle anywhere in a profound way that we really should be directing our conversations towards. Sorry, it just made me think of.
Just to close, some logistics. So now there's the icebreaker party waiting for us in the main area. And tomorrow the conference is starting at 9 sharp here with 2 keynote speakers. That's it. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you.